Well, good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you as you're logging in. We're so glad to have you with us today. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, is also on with us today. We are delighted to present Parent Forum English number 34. Literally, this is our 34th event. And Dr. Eran Magen has been with us since the beginning. Today's topic, helping your child build good habits, is one of our favorites. And we can tell from the number of registrants for this event that it's also going to be one of your favorites. It's a very important talk. Please join me, everybody, in a really warm welcome for our friend, Dr. Eran Magen. Take it away, Eran.
Hooray. Thank you, Charlene. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the generous folks with the cameras on. I'm going to start in 20 seconds. In the meantime, I'll just say I'm going to be talking for about, 20 minutes or so. And then as I'm talking, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I won't see them while I'm talking because I have a hard time multitasking, but I will see them as soon as I'm done. So when I'm done talking, we'll also stop the recording and then we'll have a discussion about what I'm talking about here or about anything else you want to talk about. So with that, let me share my screen. Good. Are we shared? Good. Charlene can see it, so we're fine. So today, helping your child build good habits. I want to just start off by saying what I try to remember to say every time, which is good work making time to think about parenting. This is not trivial. Usually parenting comes at us all the time and we're just responding to it all the time. And I think it's wonderful to be able to take a little break and just think, right? Put more tools in our tool belt. And I hope today is helpful for you. Okay, so why are we even talking about habits? Habits are extremely powerful tools to really shape our lives. Most of us brush our teeth every morning without really thinking about it very much. And if we had to think about it every morning before doing it, our dental health would be much poorer. The same is true for almost any kind of self-improvement, right? If you have, or self-maintenance or self-care, anything that you do at a regular time without having to think about it and decide to start makes life so much easier, right? We have our go-to dishes that we can cook without having to think about it. We have a thing that we do at a given time of the day, maybe a person we talk with, or maybe an exercise that we do, or maybe a book that we read, or maybe homework that we sit down to, whatever it is, right? Being able to not. I got muted. I'm not sure where I stopped. But that's right. Hands off the keyboard, Charlene. To be able to do things regularly without having to think about starting to do them every time is so powerful. And that's exactly what a habit is. It's a chain of behavior that once we hit that first step, the rest kind of rolls out by itself. And they can be good habits, or of course, they can be negative habits. They can be things that hurt us or slow us down or make things harder for us or lead to any kind of result we don't want that isn't healthy or kind of self-sabotaging. And so we want to help kids pick habits that are helpful for them as parents. And so this is what today's about. I'm going to start with the very bottom line for those of you that have either limited time or a limited attention span. So if you'll give me your full attention for the next 30 seconds or so, that should suffice. And then after that will be the details. The bottom line with forming good habits is that although a habit is made up of many steps, right? Sit down at your desk, take out the books, read the assignment, do the assignment, come to me to go over it, to get all of that. The most important step by far to get right is the very first step. Once you have a first step anchored, everything else is so much easier. So if the very first step for, let's say, doing homework in this example is sitting down at the desk, if your kid sits down at the desk as soon as 3 p.m. rolls around, or if your kid sits down at the desk immediately after dinner, or whenever is the time that you land on in the end, the sitting down is the most important step and the step that needs to be reinforced the most, and the step that needs to be approached most carefully to make sure that it's happening easily and without resistance. After the sitting down happens, everything else becomes easy. So this is true for every habit, and I'll give different examples here, right? But always think about what's the first step in the chain of behaviors that we want to see. And that first step is the most important focus point by far. Okay, that was the end of the bottom line. I'll give you the line above the bottom line, which is as we're looking at the different steps. Sorry, I'm thinking about yesterday. So yesterday, my son had off from school, and I took him to a museum here in Connecticut, the Peabody Museum. It was closed for a while. They renovated for many years. They have these magnificent dinosaur skeletons, in addition to lots of other things. And they have this really cool feature where from the parking lot, there are what looks like dinosaur tracks on the sidewalk, right? Like a dinosaur walked there as the concrete was drying, and you have these like, my son was so excited. He'd been there once without me, and he was so excited to show me the dinosaur tracks. And he, of course, wanted to step in the tracks, and he ran into them. It was kind of hard. They were far apart. The dinosaur tracks were far apart. It was hard for him to jump from one to the other, and eventually kind of gave up, and he walked for a bit, and then he started again, and he stopped a bit. And this is actually relevant for this conversation we're having, because if you think about the different steps in a habit, sit down, open your bag, read the, or if you're thinking about extending or improving behavior, we're working on handstands. And so, okay, we're able to do one against the wall. Now let's try one free floating, on the floor, no support for 10 seconds. That's a huge gap. And we want to make the gaps between the steps pretty small, very achievable, like the rungs of a ladder. Right. So if we're trying to build a habit and then improving on performance, the improvement that we're going for at every stage should be pretty small, very achievable. And we can improve and improve and improve and improve if they're small steps, just like the rungs of a ladder, right? So if a ladder is spaced apart, if the ladder is spaced apart 5 feet between each rung, and it's like this big jump to get there, 10 feet between each rung, it's going to be a very hard ladder to climb, and most of us won't try. But if it's spaced apart like a normal ladder, we just take a step and we go up. So this is a principle to keep in mind as well. And then lastly, as far as the opener goes, it's absolutely critical to be aligned with our kid about the goal for building this habit, right? We could try telling our kid, we could say, just do this every day because I think it's a good idea, or move on to the next step now because I decided. But many times that's not going to work. A lot of kids have a good mind of their own, and they think about the what and the why and how they want to allocate energy. And so if you can connect the dots for your kid and say, you have this goal and doing this thing will help you get to this goal, and here's a way to get there, life becomes a lot easier. So if you're aligned with your child, if you're able to demonstrate to your child that the plan for this goal for this habit that you're developing is aligned with the goal that your child has, it's just so much more likely to happen. So I'm going to start with alignment. How do we build alignment with our kid about a goal, about a habit that we're trying to develop and the goal that it connects to? First and foremost, we must have a good deal of goodwill with our kid. So I think about the amount of goodwill in a relationship, kind of like an account balance, like a relational account. And the goodwill in it is like the account balance. And the higher the goodwill, the more our kid trusts us, the more our kid tends to automatically assume we're on his side or her side. We want the best for him. We're taking him or her into account, right? Lots of good things happen when there's more goodwill in the relationship. They're more likely to trust us. They're more likely to be honest with us. They're more likely to put effort into things that we request and forgive us when we make mistakes and all of that. And so, especially if we're suggesting something that feels maybe a little more challenging or maybe less totally obvious why it's a good idea, to be able to tell a kid, trust me, this is a good idea, and to have your kid believe you that it's a good idea depends a lot on the amount of goodwill in the relationship. This is a whole separate session, and we're not going to go into it in any great depth now. We have separate sessions on this, both recorded and scheduled. But I'll say just really briefly that to increase the amount of goodwill in a relationship, you want to show your kid that you care about him or her, and that you respect him or her. And this has to be shown in ways that the kid understands, right? You, of course, know that everything you do because you love your kid and you want the best for your kid. But to be able to show your kid, even explicitly, I'm doing this thing because I know that you love it, right? We're going to do this thing because I know that this is something you really care about, or we're not going to do this thing because I know that you prefer that we don't, right? And show respect for these boundaries. These ways of showing your kid that you care about him or her, that you respect your kid, so important in building up goodwill. And on the converse, if you show your kid, if your kid says, I really don't want to do it, and you say, well, tough, we're going to do it anyway. And that's the extent of the conversation, that's going to reduce the amount of goodwill in the relationship. And sometimes these moments happen, right? But we want to be mindful of how much we're taking out of the relationship and how much we're depositing into the relationship, and trying to keep it on the higher side, because everything requiring joint decision making and collaboration is easier when there's more goodwill in the relationship. So that's the foundational alignment between parent and kid, right? Moving toward more goodwill in the relationship through regular shows of care and respect. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. Getting alignment with your kid about the habit that you're trying to build is the next step, right? And as soon as your kid says, yeah, this is a good idea, this becomes so much easier. If your kid wants to get into a varsity team and there needs to be some sort of regular practice, wants to get into band and there needs to be some sort of regular practice, your kid wants to have a dog or keep the dog, there needs to be some regular contributions to dog maintenance activities. Your kid wants to have time for the family to do different things, or for you to drive them somewhere. The kid needs to pitch into some of the house chores, right, to make sure that you have more time available. Connecting these dots is so important, to the point that a kid can say, yeah, that's a good idea, I want to do it. Here's like a brief recipe. You start by talking about the goal. Let's say your kid wants to get on the volleyball varsity team. And it's important to sit down and just start from that, saying, hey, Michelle, you've been talking a lot about volleyball and the varsity team, but being worried you might not get in. I'm thinking about it too. So first, I just want to check. Are you still aiming to get into the volleyball team? Michelle goes, yeah. Great. Aligned, right? Michelle says no, totally different conversation. Maybe everything you thought about is irrelevant now, right? Or if your kid wants a higher grade at something, is worried about some class, your kid wants to have a better relationship with some friend, or your kid wants to have more free time or more autonomy, whatever it is, you can start by making sure that you're talking about the same goal and agreeing that it exists. And so the next step is figuring out together, how do you get to that goal? Right? Do you need to practice more volleyball? And in that practice, what is the thing you want to be practicing? Do you want to be practicing jumping? Do you want to be practicing the attack path to the net? Do you want to practice receiving, serving? Do you want to practice playing your flute? Do you want to practice or start creating more time for me to drive you to a certain class by helping with house chores? So then I have more time to drive you, right? But figuring this out together makes it very clear for the kid how the thing that you're suggesting is connecting to the goal that your kid has. And if that works, then you're done. Basically, you agreed on a goal, you agreed on a solution, and now you're good to go. It's not always as simple, of course. Sometimes there's more conversation that needs to happen, but to the extent that you can, talk with your kid about this explicitly. I mean any kid. I mean age 3 and up, probably, right? You can have these conversations at an age-appropriate level and agree on what needs to happen next. I remember having these conversations about nail cutting with my son when he was about 3. Like, he was not into it at the beginning, right? But we sat down and had like a little conversation about it a few times, about what's the point even? Why are we doing this? And it helped, right? He would stop fidgeting, he would say, okay, and then we'd get it done. Generally speaking, if there's anything that you're asking me to do, I am not very likely to do it if I don't understand why, and if it feels bad to do it. Right? If I'm just losing time taking the dog for a walk, and my sister could be taking the dog for a walk, and why should I? That's one way. I'm so much more likely to do things that we talk about if I understand what's the benefit and if it feels good to do those things. This is such a simple formula, right? But if we just spend a few minutes thinking about how can we make sure that this makes sense to our kid to do this thing? How can we make sure that this feels good, or at least as least bad as possible? It becomes so much easier to start agreeing on the behaviors that we want to see. So here's how to not build a good habit, a new habit, I'm sorry. There's no chance for a good habit to stick. For example, let's say we want our kid talks about wanting to get into the band, and our kid therefore needs to practice the flute. And we think that the right way to practice the flute is to every day upon coming back from school, after 20 minutes of rest and relaxation, start an hour-long practice session with the flute by himself in his room with me occasionally monitoring. So if I say, okay, we're going to start Monday, do it. Every time you hit the wrong note, I'll tell you wrong, and then you'll start again from the beginning. And we're going to practice this piece that is not even going to be part of your audition. That's a great way to make sure that if your kid even starts, it's all going to be full of clashes and disagreements and annoyances on all sides, right? And very likely to fall apart pretty quickly. So the opposite is also true. If we sit down, if we have this conversation, align on the goal, align on the method, right? The goal is to get into band, the method is to practice, but your kid is worried about practicing, and maybe your kid says, well, it'll be boring and I'm not sure that I'll succeed. And it gets, I get really frustrated when I play the wrong note. And you might come up with a plan that is something like, okay, how about we say you practice for 1 minute after coming back home from school. Does that feel doable? And your kid is like, yeah, I guess. Okay, so we'll just start with a little bit and we'll just practice a little bit of sight.
क्या आनन्द बिस्तारै सर्ने भने सबै
And we'll practice a little bit of sight reading for 1 minute. And we're going to start off pretty easy, right? So you can feel successful. It's not going to be like always the same note for, the full 1 minute, but we're going to put it at a challenge level that makes you happy, right? Some kids like more challenge, some less, but we'll figure out what it is and put it there. I'm never going to say wrong, right? We'll agree on some way for me to signal, like maybe I'll do like this when it's time to go again or something like that. We'll figure out. And then at the end of every training session, I'm going to throw confetti in the air or whatever it is, right? Or you know what? I'll play a recording of somebody, some piece that you can join in karaoke style. Let's figure this out because it's more pleasant to play with other people, but you can control the playback or whatnot. Oh, and by the way, the reason we're practicing this particular piece that's not on your audition is because the audition piece is pretty advanced, and starting to practice that right away can be very frustrating and can be difficult and maybe demotivating and so on. And so I suggest we start with a simpler piece that's also more fun, right? A Taylor Swift song. And then we'll transition to this other thing that you're going to be playing at the audition. Does this make sense? Everybody agrees? Yes. Okay. Right. So this is how you, I would say, stand a chance of helping your kid develop a habit of practicing every day upon coming back from school. Okay, I think I covered most of this. I will say in terms of reward and praise, remember what I was showing you about that first step in a chain of behaviors in a habit. So in this case, maybe the first step is going to the place where practice is going to happen and setting up the note, the music sheet. That first step, if you can make that happen regularly at every 4 o'clock or whenever you agree on with your kid, if it's 4 o'clock and your kid goes and puts on the sheet music, it's a huge win. Because again, extending the time of practicing more, practicing harder stuff, putting other stuff on the music stand, that's relatively easy. It's getting the mind to shift away from playing Mario Kart to putting the sheet music. That's the hard part, right? And so this is the part that you want to reinforce and praise and reward lavishly. The transition into the new activity is the hardest part. And that is already party celebration worthy. in terms of how easy it should be to begin with, especially if it's something that your kid is reticent about, either worried or just uninterested in doing, I very strongly and very honestly suggest pick a goal together that your kid thinks is very easy to do, that your kid thinks can be done even without much effort, and then cut it in half and start from there, right? At the very, very beginning, your kid needs to feel basically certain that just by trying, they'll succeed. Later on, you can increase the goal. Later on, you'll increase the behaviors, the duration or the precision or what have you, right? But at the beginning, it needs to be super easy, super, super easy. When my son was, I think about 5, I wanted to see if he'd want to learn how to read and write Hebrew, which I'm fluent in, and he speaks and understands. I speak with him in Hebrew, but obviously he didn't know how to read and write. And I mean, it's young. It's not like he needed to write fluently or anything, but I wanted him to start identifying the letters. But that's something that requires formal sitting down and learning, right? It's very different than talking just all day long in a language. And I talked with him about it to ask if he wants to, and he said, yeah. And we started super small, super, super small. I asked him how he feels about how long he thinks he could do, and he said 2 minutes, although I'm not sure he understood what 2 minutes meant exactly. And then I said, how about we do 1 minute? And he was very surprised. And he said, sure, yeah, I can do 1 minute, no problem. And then we sat down and we set a timer for 1 minute. And we did it. And we did it for a few days, and it got really easy. And we extended the time later on, and it was fine. And he reads in Hebrew at this point, right? Like actual letters and words and sentences. And I'm telling you this story just to make a point. First of all, I mean, I'm eating my own dog food, right? Like I really believe in the system, and I think I know that it works, even with relatively strange, difficult things. But the point is that even if you start very small, very tiny, you can extend later to a lot, right? It's just the first step has to be a step your kid is okay with, right? And then you get a handhold or a foothold or however you want to think about it. And then you can bring in more, but it has to start with something that does not create resistance in your kid. Same thing with helping around the house. Taking either clearing dishes or setting the table, you start with something very simple, especially for a young kid, right? What can you do? Can you bring napkins to the table, right? Something very easy. Can you take away the napkins? Can you take away your plate? Can you take away your plate and your silverware? Things like that, right? So you start very, very simple, and you slowly increase when they realize that it's not a big deal, that it's not so hard. And again, the increases, we want to make them small. There's a reason why rungs on a ladder are not spaced 10 feet apart, right? It's not this huge cliffhanger jump to the next rung every time we climb a ladder. It's a very simple step, right? And the same thing with anything that we are asking our kids to do, especially on a regular basis. Practice your flute, right? They started with a minute's worth of practice of, identifying 2 different notes. And that was very easy for them. And you say, great, let's add a 3rd note, just 1 minute, still just 1 minute. They're like, well, it's easy. You're like, easy, great. How about we add a few more notes, right? 4 notes. Let's do that for a couple of days until you hit, 90% correct or something like that. 5 notes. Great. Let's try a different scale. There's going to be a sharp in there. But slowly, adding just a little bit at a time. Then you can extend the practice time, or you can make it a little bit more complicated. But the jumps will kill the new habit, right? Like a sudden feeling of hitting a failure, total failure, predictable total failure, time after time, is like hitting a wall. It's extremely demotivating. It's okay to fail, of course, right? But we don't want to know that we will only and always fail, right? So we increase the difficulty by a little bit, and failure increases by a little bit. Then we practice and failure goes down. Then we increase the difficulty again by a little bit, but we don't increase it by 10 feet, right? We go to the next rung of the ladder. This requires careful thinking, but can allow the habit to live and thrive and grow. Same thing with, again, clearing dishes, right? Well, you can clear the napkins, great. Now clear everything off the table. You're going to get some resistance or some broken plates. they don't know how to do it if they're little, right? Washing dishes, right? How about you wash a couple of them? How about how about you rinse and I'll load the dishwasher, or I'll put the soap and you'll rinse and put in the dryer, whatever it is, right? But slowly, slowly. Okay, talked about this. So I think this is the end now, coming into the home stretch. In terms of priorities, when you're thinking about starting your kid on a new habit, helping your kid form a new habit that would be helpful for your kid, maybe for you as well, here are the things that I would suggest focusing on in order. One is consistency of initiating the habit, right? If the habit is take the dog for a walk at 4 p.m., the most important thing is starting to take the dog for a walk at 4 p.m. by far, even if the walk at the beginning is like 2 minutes, and then you need to take the dog on another walk afterwards, which I recognize sounds insane. But to get the kid to a point where your kid is thinking, oh, it's 4 p.m., time to get it up, and going out, once you're there, you've basically won. It's happening, right? Time to practice my instrument, help with the thing at home. I'm getting really frustrated with my younger sibling, and I leave the room instead of getting way in my sibling's face. Whatever is a habit that you're trying to foster here. Start with consistency of initiation to be able to start that first step at a regular time. After that comes the quality of performance, call it, right? So like with the example with the musical notes, maybe that's really easy to measure, right? And you want to hit some very high percentage of success, and then you'll make it a little harder and wait until the success goes there again. But always keeping the habit consistent. We're practicing at 4 p.m. for 1 minute, for 2 minutes, for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes, whatever it is, right? And once you have that in, then you start thinking about improving the quality of the performance. And only at the end you talk about quantity. So we started 4 p.m. to practice flute for 2 minutes, and we've hit 90% success with our 4 notes or whatever it is, and now let's start doing it for longer periods of time and see if we can sustain it. You always take your dish off the table, and now you're starting to take off other people's dishes off the table. That's a quantity, right? You're taking the dog on a walk, and now you're going to go on a 10-minute walk, on a 15-minute walk, or whatever it is, right? So that's the last thing to kind of cement into place. I'll just zip through this because I've been talking for a long time. That conversation is really important. The alignment conversation is really important. And it's worth thinking about the right time to have it. For example, not when you're very tired, not when your kid is very tired, not when anybody's particularly upset, right? Like find a good time to have a conversation where you can sit down and talk about it together. Say, what's your goal? What's a way to get there? What's a good time to start, right? That trigger that I wrote there, right? How do you know that it's time to start the habit? Is it because it's 4 p.m.? Is it because dinner is over? Is it because I'm calling everybody over to dinner? Is it because I'm saying, come help me prepare lunch for school, please? Is it because the phone rings? What's the thing that makes us start the habit? And in terms of the goals for building a new habit, I think it's very helpful to choose goals that you have control over. And results are rarely things we have control over, right? Like to have a goal to be promoted at work is good and can help us align our behavior around it. And to have a goal to get an A on the test is good, but we don't have direct control over it. And sometimes we do all the right things and we don't get an A, and that can get really frustrating for everybody involved and feel like very, very disappointing and very confusing. But we can practice every day for 30 minutes, right? That's under our control. And to say practicing every day for 30 minutes with this level of quality is success is very helpful, because then at the very least, you as a parent can say you succeeded. You put in the work that you wanted to put in. Maybe it turns out it wasn't enough work. Maybe that needs to be updated, right? But you succeeded in pursuing this thing. And then if you have, there's almost always a way to track how much people engaged in this activity, the habit you're trying to build. If it's taking the dog, you can just put in a little table by the little chart by the door and just do a little check mark or put a gold star or whatever you want, initial, whatever it is. Even for grownups, this is extremely effective because we don't want to, nobody wants to break a momentum of success, right? And so if we see that we've been doing this thing, we've been exercising for 4 days in a row, and we pass by this chart on our way to the kitchen, we're like, yeah, I mean, I'd like to have it be 5, right? And you go back and you do your exercise or whatever it is, stretching. So have a way to log. It really adds a lot of momentum. If a time comes, when a time comes and we slip, we don't do the habit. It's 4 p.m. Everybody forgot. Everybody took a nap. We all decided to go out for an ice cream, whatever it is. We forgot completely about this habit. And we didn't do the thing we were supposed to do. The next day, just do it again. Just don't fret about it too much. If you start missing the habit consistently, your kid starts missing the first step consistently, twice, 3 times in a row, then it's time to sit down and think about what happened, right? But otherwise, just keep moving forward. Don't compensate for what happened before. Your kid forgot to clear his plate from dinner today and ran off to do a thing. Tomorrow, your kid doesn't need to clear 2 plates, because now we just increased the demand by a lot all of a sudden, right? So just move on to the next day. Bad habits we'll talk about another time if we need to. So to summarize, if you want to help your kid create new habits, make sure that you're aligned with your kid and on the goal and why this habit will help your kid reach the goal that your kid wants to reach. And then introduce the habits in a way that is slow, that is very likely to make your kid be successful, and that your kid knows in advance is likely to be successful, feels relevant to a goal that your kid has, and pleasant. And you can make it pleasant by introducing rewards, by introducing praise. Make sure that you have a clear trigger, a thing that tells your kid now is the time to start. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a thing that happened, maybe it's a thing somebody says. Make sure your kid is doing the first step consistently. That's the most important part by far, right? Putting on sneakers, stepping outside, coming back in, putting the music on the music stand, whatever it is. And then have a way of tracking it, just so everybody can see how it's working out and your kid can develop a sense of momentum and success. Okie doke, I think that's it.